I'm Caroline Sinders. I'm a researcher and artist, and I look at technology and its impacts in society. For the past 8 years, I've been looking at online harassment and specifically how the design of platforms and systems can create this harm. And my lens has been through online harassment and looking at big platforms. Um, I usually make a joke here that this is the face I make when I have to read Reddit and 4chan and see people saying just awful stuff on the internet. This is me giving side eye. But really, as an artist, I like to challenge or intervene in tech and algorithms, either through my artwork or through my research work. And I like to try to address inequity in technology by making things that create technology. And as an artist and researcher, this is the question I'm trying to answer. While I span both, or rather design, civil society, art, and big tech, because I occasionally work with big tech platforms. And the question I ask is, how can we make better, ethical, less scary, more humane technology? And I believe it's with design. And I think it's design because design isn't a skill, isn't just a skill, but a practice and a language in and of itself. So to start solving problems around harassment, but also creating spaces for human connection online, design needs to be at the equal forefront of this conversation, not just engineering. Design is what is distilling policy and code into digestible and interactable interfaces for users. Design is the thing that explains what code and policy are outlining. So when it comes to things like harassment, design is really important. And I'm calling this area of research design policy. So what is that in action? How many of you have ever filed an online harassment report or reported a piece of content? I'm imagining some of you are raising your hands right now. No one? Okay, later today after my presentation, open up Twitter and select any piece of content and act like you're going to file a harassment report. It won't submit it until the very end, so you can go through and see what it looks like. But when you select a piece of content on any platform to file a harassment report, it gives you a set of choices. Sometimes it will say, is this targeted at someone? Is it about like their personal information? Is this about self-harm? And it gives you these choices. So when you're selecting those choices and their radio dials, what you're actually selecting is the area of the policy that the content falls into. And as you go through the reporting flow, you're giving more and more context to that report that's given to a content moderator. So online harassment or reporting UI that you see is literally the design taking the technical infrastructure of something like Twitter or Instagram of how the report is given to a content moderator and the policy and making it understandable and interactive for users. This is why we don't have to be policy experts to file harassment. So design policy is this kind of space of thinking about how design can translate these really sort of complex and nebulous areas. But why would we need something like design policy beyond harassment? Wikipedia defines policy as a deliberate system of principles to guide decisions and achieve rational outcomes. A policy is a statement of intent and is implemented as a procedure or protocol. Policies are generally adopted by a governance body within an organization. So policy is just a good set of rules to make things work. And as designers, we work within systems and rules already, from design hierarchy to design patterns, and same with any kind of technical infrastructure. So policy can function in a similar way. So design policy is just recognizing that software and hardware have systems that are regulated and that design can make policy easier to understand, which is great because design policy is important, especially when we're thinking about or combating how user data and privacy is being mishandled egregiously right now in technology, like events like Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, to everyday dark patterns, to even things like GDPR. And since GDPR has been passed, it's been radically misinterpreted across platforms and websites. And GDPR is in of itself a wicked design problem. How do you show this policy change, not slow down users in reading the website they want to read, but also articulate what cookie or ad tracking is and give them a choice. It is one of, I would argue, one of the most wicked design problems that is all about design policy. So Fox News doesn't even implement GDPR, which is illegal, and we should all report them right now. And here's another example of Harper's Bazaar. So some think tanks and watchdog groups would argue that this is probably illegal because there's only one choice, which is accept, which is not a consensual choice. Your choices are yes or don't read the website. But then there's this example, and I took this of BuzzFeed 6 months ago. If you check BuzzFeed now, they've actually improved it. And this example is bad design. Why? Because it doesn't really show you that you have more than one option here. You do. You have I accept and show purposes. But show purposes doesn't look like a button. And what does show purposes mean? Is it legible? Is it a legible sentence? When you click on it, it's actually the reject all. It's the reject all of all the ad tracking, right? And this is what we would call a dark pattern, because when we go back to the first one, what is, more legible here? This is a purposeful design misinterpretation of GDPR that could be argued in a court of law that it's technically fulfilling the requirements of GDPR. But we all know here that this is really confusing to users because it looks like they only have one option. GDPR does get implemented correctly, as we see here with The Atlantic, and we could still argue that maybe this is dark pattern-esque because I accept is darkened, right? But we could also then argue that that's a design norm in the design world. So the work that I do is thinking about where design fits into these spaces. I'm going to keep going further with some research. So in 2016, for an American news group called Fusion News, I created a taxonomy after reading the ethnographer Whitney Phillips's book, This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things, a book to try to visually explain the different forms of trolling. Trolling is an umbrella word. It used to historically mean something that would kind of shock and awe in a perversive and funny way. But trolling has also been used to harm. It's been used to engage in harassment. In 2014, when I was studying Gamergate, which was a harassment campaign to push women and marginalized groups out of games, Gamergate would send rape threats and death threats to its victims and just say, well, it's a joke, I'm just trolling. But we all know that there's a difference between a rape threat and maybe sending your friend an inappropriate GIF at work. And if we call both of those trolling, we flatten the meaning of trolling, and we also lessen the severity of what a rape threat is, which we shouldn't do. A rape threat is not a joke. So when you put it into the bucket of trolling, you make it seem less serious than it actually is. And so inside of this space, inside of the way that this word has changed, I wanted to make a diagram that could better explain maybe the linguistic history of trolling and also how it refers to so many different things, and that maybe the word itself needs a new kind of definition. So I consider this a living taxonomy. It should be updated as culture updates, e.g. Donald Trump has been elected president, so all the Trump data points should be shifted into a more serious category. But this diagram has been used in different law classes to help teach trolling and policy. And this is the first iteration of the diagram, where I was just trying to think about severity and then also naming. So absurdist trolling, casual trolling, agitated trolling, harmful trolling, and dangerous trolling. And as you see, harmful and dangerous trolling, I view as like criminal harassment. And as you'll see, there's things about doxing people, there is bomb threats, there's revenge porn, there's rape and death threats. And this eventually turned into this, which is a matrix. And a lot of this is because if you look back at this one page, what if something that's absurd is trolling, if it continues, let's say every day for a year, is that still absurdist or casual, or is it harmful? Well, it would be harmful because it's such continued harassment, right? At a certain point, one action can actually be a much bigger action. This is what we call context around harassment. So the idea of someone you never met, for example, sent you a heart email once, maybe that's not harassment, but they sent it every single day for 2 years, that would be harassment, right? Like that's very creepy and unsettling behavior. So it's important to be able to actually have these bleed across more. After consulting with a lawyer, Amanda Lewandowski, she gave me the idea that I should actually make a matrix so that users could very easily see the close overlap. And I think it works best. And I worked with a designer at Fusion News to work on this. And the reason now, if we look at this, that's out of date is I made this right before the US presidential election, and anything about Trump should be in this serious and harmful category, again, because of context, because we're talking about a power differential. Donald Trump as a president is a much different character than Donald Trump, a wealthy TV show actor, because he has much more power across many more buckets, not just celebrity power, but actual political power. So this is a way that I was trying to unpack trolling. So we have casual, absurdist, harmful, and serious. Another thing that I worked on about harassment was this tool when I was on the design team of the Wikimedia Foundation. I was their inaugural design researcher for the anti-harassment team. So this is the only public tool on harassment mitigation that exists for a major platform. Wikipedia is the 5th most visited website in the world. So this tool was designed for the Wikimedia Foundation to analyze a form of online stalking that we saw inside of the encyclopedia called Wiki Hounding, where users will follow each other and undo edits or antagonize each other. This project was a co-design project made with direct and frequent feedback and collaboration from the Wikimedia community. So I would co-design and co-research with the actual users, present them wireframes, and we would work together to make the most usable one for them. And it was a finalist for Fast Company's Innovation by Design and Social Good category in 2018. So as you can see, so this is a rough outline of it. The idea is that for a high frequency user, someone who's been on Wikipedia a lot, who's called an admin, they have more responsibilities on Wikipedia than normal editors, and they're elected. They're often brought in to mitigate. This was a tool so they could very quickly scan an interaction history between two users. So this is a close-up. So the idea is like you could quickly scan and see like, oh my gosh, actually, yes, this person's being harassed. And this is what it looks like online. And as you can see, there's more information that someone could click on. I'm going to show you a few more projects. This is one that I made with Amnesty International with their Troll Patrol project. So I designed the labeling flow for Amnesty International's Troll Patrol project, where with 6,000 volunteers, we hand labeled 600,000 tweets sent to female journalists and politicians about online harassment. These labeled tweets were then used to potentially generate an AI toxic classifier, but also they were used for just statistical reporting in the report itself that Amnesty published. What we needed was a logic flow that made sense to volunteers and then had to be structured correctly for the data scientists to analyze and sort. I also then edited a guide for Troll Patrol's project to staying safe online, and then I had to train volunteers for the project to recognize and sort harassment. So this is a tree-like structure that first starts with the most broad. We have 3 buckets: no, problematic, and abusive. Can anyone guess why we would have that? We were really oh, sorry. Does someone have a thought? No, I'm asking like, does anyone know why we would have a difference between problematic and abusive or what they mean? The tweets are redacted primarily for privacy reasons for a large research project, just as an FYI, because we published all this stuff online.
Matrix where you're moving from casual to kind of criminal?
Yes, so super close, and that's actually pretty right. One of the things we were concerned about was we started to think about how Twitter actually, with their policy, there are so many holes around what is harassment that if we're going to do a robust report on harassment, harassment that people face may not be viewed by content moderators as breaking the policy because it's not severe enough. And for us, we wanted to capture that contextual in between toxic language that is, potentially misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic in nature. Those kinds of things that maybe wouldn't break the policy, but would still hurt a victim, right? So something that's less severe than harassment. And this is where problematic sits. Because if we're only capturing the things that Twitter would break Twitter's policy, we aren't actually studying the extent of harassment on the platform because of flaws in Twitter's policy on recognizing what is harassment. So problematic was a way for us to capture toxic behavior that perhaps isn't considered technically toxic via the policy. And that in between is really important when you are looking at hypercontextual or more qualitative data. So if you select either problematic or abusive, it sends you to this. And these categories also pull directly out of Amnesty's areas of study of what is considered harassment. So looking at all these different buckets. And then the last one is finally more quantitative information of what directly this kind of actual data is it text, video, image, other, etc. And these, I think you can select multiple ones. And then lastly, oh yeah, totally.
Of the, was it 6,000 people that contributed?
Yeah.
Did you see the way that they labeled, like were there differences in the way that they labeled the content depending on sort of where they were or what their backgrounds were or anything, or was it kind of across the board similar?
It was kind of across the board similar. We had a project that I worked on at the University of Amsterdam in their digital methods initiative, where we looked at the background of the labelers. There wasn't a really there wasn't any kind of big difference of where they came from. Just what ended up being surprising, and this is why it's important to always look at context around your data set, is we actually had like 30% of labelers come from Nigeria. But that turns out that's because Amnesty, on their first Decoders project, they focused on a project about a Nigerian oil spill and heavily promoted the platform in Nigeria.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, we looked at like reading habits because we asked a survey at the end, and it was just pretty much like pretty even. And this is a software I've designed for IBM Watson that is a chatbot. And so a lot of this is about user flow and logic. So what we tried to do is in the sign up process, as well as in the in the setup and sign up process, we're actually trying to show or illustrate what like a knowledge tree or a conversation tree can look like. So a lot of the technicality of what the software is doing, we illustrate a little bit for users, but we do it in a place that would make sense for when they're setting up the software. So we viewed this as a place and time to educate and illuminate what the system is doing, but in a space where we knew they'd already be active, which is the setup of the system. So at this point in the process, our persona Ivy has dragged her data over to upload. She's already selected what kind of chatbot she wants. There's like 4 different kinds. It's like e-commerce. I'm actually forgetting some of the other ones. And as her data is uploading, it's telling her how the system will visualize the data and sort it. So again, it's reinforcing the structure of what the chatbot could be. Then she clicks on one of the topic areas of campus, and it starts to show her suggestions based off of how the system is using natural language processing to sort. And she can add things together. And then she gets an overview of how her data has been divided up. She clicks on campus. She sees subtopics inside of campus. And then she clicks on library. She starts to see all the different questions she's uploaded. And now she can start working through them. So she's building out the conversation now of where is the library? and we walk her through the UI. So that's telling her there may be multiple things here. And she starts to add information and starts to get pre-populated. And so then so this is the advanced view. And for more developer inclined users, i.e. the majority of IBM's base, we made also a more or less designed, but more developer friendly view where again, you can see things pretty quickly. I'm sorry. So this is some of the more corporate work I've worked on. And I have some more stuff, but we should probably shift to Feminist Dataset, right, to be mindful of time. Okay. This is just an idea I had around how do you visualize your own personal data inside of Spotify, as well as the Spotify Discover Weekly in this area I call data ingredients, in case you're wondering what this is. A video I worked on about emotion recognition, the Tate project, where we built physical metaphors around data privacy. People could vote on feature banning, a library or a dictionary of terms, take away things about networks, and just more of the project. Okay, finally, Feminist Dataset. So Feminist Dataset is a project inspired by Thomas Twait's Toaster project of analyzing the machine learning pipeline from start to finish, from data collection, data training, data modeling, all the way up to launching a chatbot, but under the critical lens of intersectional feminism. Intersectional feminism is a branch of feminism asserting that all aspects of social and political identities, gender, race, class, sexuality, disability, and discrimination overlap or intersect. So, for example, race with gender in the case of a Black woman. The word itself was first used by scholar and civil rights advocate Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. While studying to be a lawyer, she saw that gender and race were looked at as completely separate issues. To Crenshaw, studying them in isolation made no sense. She saw that women of color, for example, are doubly discriminated against, particularly in law. So there's this 1976 case of Drafen Reed versus General Motors, which Crenshaw uses to illustrate intersectionality. 5 African American women sue car manufacturer General Motors for racial and gender discrimination. But the courts found that the women in general weren't discriminated against when it came to jobs as secretaries, because they said that there was a fact that GM employed African American factory workers disproved racial discrimination, but ignored the fact that the sheer majority of the secretaries at GM were white women, and all the factory workers were men, and they were Black men. So, or sorry, a majority of them were Black men. So the women lost. How does this relate to data? Well, if we start to look at the history of feminism, it's important to recontextualize where race, disability, gender, and class fit into this. It means that certain books in my project, because I hold workshops to collect data, cannot be included. More importantly, this is a trans-aware and trans-inclusive data set, which means that a lot of first and second wave feminism books that focus specifically on cisgender feminism is one that I will not include. And for me, this project is collaborative. I collect the data by holding workshops because I want it to be community driven. And I wanted to try to get an expansive view of feminism, not just my view. That didn't feel very intersectional to me if it was me doing this. This dataset started in 2017 as a response to the many documented problems in technology and the bias in machine learning. As I said before, it is a critical research and art project that examines bias in machine learning through data collection, data training, neural networks, and new forms of user interface, as well as the projected creation of a feminist artificial intelligence. This is an example from when in our first workshop, we were training, we were hand labeling together a Zoe Leonard text. It's inspired by the work of the Maker Movement, Critical Design, Arte Utile, the Critical Engineering Manifesto, Xenofeminism, and the Feminist Principles of the Internet. And then it's this multi-year project. Feminist Dataset imagines data creation as well as data sets and archiving as an act of protest. In a time where so much personal data is caught and hidden by large tech companies, used for targeted advertising and algorithmic suggestions, what does it mean to make a data set about political ideology, one designed for use as protest? How can data sets come from creative spaces? How can they be communal acts and works? What are the possibilities of a data set about a community that is made by that community? It can be a self-portrait, it can be protest, it can be a demand to be seen, it can be an intervention and confrontation, it can be incredibly political. What about how a system interprets that data? What if the system were also open to critique as well as community input? Um, Sorry, I'm like trying to hurry along, so I'm going to skip what I was going to read on this slide. So there's a kind of re-examining of what software can do, and it's similar to the creation of critical design that addresses the limitations of product design. Critical design was a term coined in 1997 by Anthony Doon, and it comes from a practice he developed with Fiona Raby when they were research fellows at the Royal College of Art. Critical design as a practice is one among a growing number of approaches that aims to prevent and define interrogative, discursive, and experimental approaches in the design and research process. Critical design demands that design stop existing in terms of capitalist production, which is a function of product design, and push product design towards self-examination and critical and cultural critique. Dude and Rabi highlight that by acknowledging that the design precision needs to mature and find ways of operating outside the tight constraints of servicing industry. At its worst, product design simply reinforces capitalist values. Design needs to be seen for what it is, just one possibility, and to develop alternatives for itself. It needs to establish an intellectual stance of its own, or the design profession is destined to lose all intellectual credibility and be simply viewed as an agent of capitalism. They write, by defining how product design can be created, critical design also creates new ways for an audience to engage with design and understand all of the different facets of design in their daily lives. So Feminist Dataset is inspired by this critical lens, taking aspects of the critical design movement and applying it to machine learning. So Feminist Dataset operates in a similar vein to Thomas Thwaites' Toaster project, a critical design project in which Thwaites builds a commercial toaster from scratch, from melting iron ore to building circuits and creating a new plastic toaster body mold. Feminist Dataset, however, takes a critical and artistic view on software, and particularly machine learning. What does it mean to thoughtfully make with machine learning, to consider every angle of making, iterating, and designing? Every step of this process needs to be thoroughly examined through a feminist lens, and like Thwaites' toaster, every step has to actually work. This is an example of when this was installed in the Victorian Albert Museum. A brief snapshot of our manifesto, which is online. A flowchart that I make, that I put up in the workshop to try to get people to understand how we can think about data, and just some brief questions to ask themselves. Making must be thoughtful and critical in order to create equity. It must be open to interpretation and feedback. We must understand the role of data creation and how systems can use, misuse, and benefit from data. Data must be seen as something created from communities and a reflection of that community. Data ownership is key. Data's position inside of technology systems is political, it's activated, and it's intimate. For there to be equity in machine learning, every aspect of the system needs to be examined, taken apart, and put back together. It needs to integrate the realities and contexts and constraints of all different kinds of people, not just the ones who built the early web. Technology needs to reflect those who are on the web now. Which leads us to the next form of the project, now that the data collection is starting to wrap up. Inside of machine learning, it's important to remember that human hands and human decisions make AI happen. What you're seeing here is a photograph by Yan Song for the New York Times. It's of workers at the headquarters of Rujin Technology Company in Xianshan in China's Henan province. They identify objects and images to help artificial intelligence make sense of the world. What they're doing is paid labor, similar to Mechanical Turk, to train AI systems. And this is a new kind of systematized factory job. But generally, in the world, it falls under the gig economy. What you're seeing here is a screenshot of a Mechanical Turk view where a worker can go and select different kinds of work to do. Right now, I'm building a system that imagines what a better Mechanical Turk system could look like, one created from an intersectional feminist lens that can be used by research groups, individuals, and maybe even companies. The system will be, I was saying ethical, but now I have issues with that word, in the sense that it will allow for more transparency in who trains and labels a data set. The system will also give researchers and project creators the ability to see how much one trainer has trained the data, as well as invite and verify new trainers. Additionally, the project creators will be able to pay trainers through a system, which is a calculator I've designed, which suggests living wage payments. The system also creates necessary data about the data set itself. This includes who trained and labeled the data set, where they're from, when the data was made or finished, and what's in the data set, i.e., is it a data set of white faces in America or a data set of scraped Twitter responses? If machine learning is going to move forward in terms of transparency and ethics, then how data is trained, how trainers interact with it, and how data sets are used and algorithms and model creation needs to be critically examined as well. So this is probably a good time to stop and ask questions.
Very informative and rich, and I'm sure people have got lots of questions. So, yeah, does anyone have anything that they would like to ask Caroline at this point? Everyone's brains are just frying right now.
No worries.
While people formulate things, to kind of bring it back to the brief that we have for this week. So the task is to create a feminist chatbot that could address the problem of online abuse. And as I say, we've been so far kind of looking at different stakeholders, different types of abuse that exist, different tech spaces that it can happen in. Connor and I have been scribbling down additional post-it notes as you've been talking, but I was just wondering, is there anything that you think people should be watching out for as they're going through this design process, in terms of empathizing with people that are going through this, or thinking about it from a slightly different perspective in terms of who we might be designing for? Anything around that?
Sure. I mean, I would keep in mind that you may have a specific user in mind, but you can't control who or which groups use your product, right? So if you're imagining like people that you actually know using it, and that's how you're building and that's how you're designing it, bear in mind that like when something's online, anyone can use it. And that means you should try to design for all different kinds of use cases and of people. That can mean, are you using accessible colors? Like maybe there are people that have low vision that are going to use your chatbot, for example. Can the text be made bigger in any way, or will it crash? Will people be accessing this on mobile, right? Did you build a desktop only thing, and then have you told people that? Or even in terms of language, are you, if you're asking things of people, are you being straightforward? If you're taking data from people, are you going to store it properly? How can you ensure that? And how can you articulate that back to the users?
Just scribbling down notes.
No worries. I think with chatbots, we are a little constrained by language, which makes them a different thing to design for than if we were building in general, like a product app, right? And if we were building an app or a platform, I would have a lot more suggestions just in terms of trying to focus on a methodology myself and some friends created called the human rights centered design process, which is imagining, well, what happens when someone's using your app, and if it's using data about them? What happens if they're in a country where there's a radical power shift, right? Will your app aid nefarious actors in power? Or, if there's a data breach, have you put anyone in harm's way? So things to keep in mind is that, if you're storing images of people, what if someone is, gay in a country where that's not okay, and your data process or like your image storing is leaked, right? Like that has real radical implications for people's safety. So it's important to think about like a broader context than just like the city, the state, or the country you're in, right? That like digital tools mean that like anyone can use them at any time. And that means that there could be people, literally across the world using an app of yours. And did you design for their context? Did you design for their safety?
Okay.
I was kind of wondering if you could, do you have any sort of idea of why like a conversational interface or a chatbot is, or maybe what are the advantages of that over a traditional application or like maybe a more visual user interface?
I wouldn't say that it's better because I don't view it as better. I just view it as like a different choice. Because again, it all depends on context. Like for some people, a more visual interface or an audio only interface may be the better choice for them. But I just think it's a different way to communicate. And I think in certain cases it works well if you need the power of conversation. And if you need conversation systematized at scale, which really can be if you're a customer website, for example, or sorry, like if you have like e-commerce and you're dealing with customers, like I think that's a really great time. In a more artistic lens, I think chatbots can be really great for walking people through an experiential installation. It can be really great for museums. It can be really helpful for working through bureaucracy. It can be helpful in unpacking. We're trying to explain something that's complex in bite-sized chunks. So you are, as the creator, more in control of the flow. So you know that people are working with something. Um, those are things that come to mind.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, nice.
Does anyone have any questions for Caroline?
Yeah, I would like to know more about the toaster project. Like, why is it melted? Like, I just can't get my head around it. Like, why you did it that way?
So that's not my project. Yeah. No, that's like a well-known critical design project made in like 2005.
It's made by himself, and over like how long did it take you to make it? I don't remember the artist's
Are
name.
you talking about the guy who made the toaster?
Yeah.
Oh, his point was that. Wait, are we talking about the same
The
person?
toaster. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the point was that he was just fascinated by the cheap cost of it and actually studied why it was so cheap. And then when he tried to make it, he just realized that the reason why it was so cheap is because there was a lot of like I don't know the exact details, but the history of it is that it shouldn't be this cheap. It is only this cheap because of the people that are making it. The way it's manufactured basically is just bad, really. For
Yeah,
the
it's an
for people.
exploitative supply chain.
It was funny that it turned out like his end project was to actually make one, but I think that's yeah. I think what's interesting about it is what's behind it. So the whole like research that he made, he was just shocked by the price of the toaster. Like on Argos, it's like £5 for the cheapest toaster or something.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I don't know if this is how you see it, Caroline, but the way I understand your inspiration from that project is that you're also in Feminist Dataset trying to make visible the processes and structures and forms of exploitation that sit behind machine learning systems.
Yes, exactly.
It's pretty cool project. I
Mm-hmm.
like this. Also, sometimes I was going to say that's how they presented it to us. My tutor, she really likes this piece of work in particular, and she said this is interesting because people will question what the toaster is, but then when they really look into it, everyone knows what a toaster looks like. So it's funny to think that this person actually has made one, but on top of that, it's like people are obviously, like you just did, right? I don't really get it. And I think that's where like some people will get more curious, and sometimes that will make people want to know more than just seeing like, let's say, a piece of data visualization of how toasters are made and how much, like toaster we're making a year and why is it like important to think about your toaster. I don't know. I think making one is like it's an interesting like, approach. Like the idea of like artifacts kind of.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
It's like yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, because I think that sometimes it's really difficult to visualize or create a piece of art with this kind of information that can be like so untangible.
Yeah,
So
so
how can
much
we
as
bring
well.
like objects, or how can we bring it into reality so people can actually engage with the subjects and give it a thought? I think it's quite difficult.
Yeah, I think actually sort of framing a chatbot as an artifact and considering what its kind of humor or its physical realization or its appearance does to generate that kind of intrigue and humor that the Toaster Project does is like probably helpful for this week.
Yeah. I think it should be quite helpful to sort of widen the scope of what it can actually do, considering our constraints for the week as well. We're not really going to be able to make like a, functioning chatbot that can maybe like deliver a service, but it can definitely sort of evoke things or use the narrative in a specific way.
Yeah.
In the way of sort of more in the way of like an artistic artifact.
I have a question. So like her work, like Feminist Data Set and all the other projects is very like collaborative and like community driven, and we are building chatbot, which might seem very like distant in a way because it's all like it's in a digital space. So I would guess the question would be, how is there anything we could make this more intimate in a way? Like, because I think she's really good at bringing people together. So
That's a great question. Caroline, did you hear that question?
I didn't know.
Was that your work is really successful in physically engaging people and being community driven, and with this week's work we're obviously building like a digital tool or product. So the question was whether you had any ideas about how the concept of a chatbot could be brought into that more kind of intimate interaction with community.
I mean, it all depends upon who the community is you're designing for or working with. So in the sense of where my work sits, I've been, I almost said lucky, but just more like I do a lot of background research on what communities are pre-existing and where I think my work will sit, and then going and engaging with those communities as best I can. And so that means like a lot of being bold and asking strangers to speak to them. A lot of it is doing a lot of pre-work of trying to follow things as best I can on Twitter, finding NGOs and think tank groups and university labs that do reports on the area that I want to work in, and sort of seeing what's already in the landscape. And so a lot of my work, my whole body of work is driven art, and I spend a lot of time reading and doing research before I start a project. And even the Mechanical Turk project in and of itself it's the one I would argue I've done the least research on, even though I've done an extraordinary amount of research as a designer and researcher on it. But there are like entire research labs at universities that are looking at the effects of the gig economy and gig workers, and then also looking specifically at Mechanical Turk. There just aren't a lot of groups that have a UX designer with them, for example. And so for me with Feminist Dataset, a large part of this will also be acknowledging that there's a lot of work that I pull from, that I read, that I'll be looking at. And at the end of this project, this will be like almost having done like a 7-year-long dissertation in a way. But there's gonna be so much just research that this touches on or that it pulls from. So I guess a big thing for all of you to think about is like when you have an idea, well, who was there first? So if you're thinking about making a clothing app, for example, are you looking at like other countries? I was just in Sweden teaching a workshop for a friend's class, and a group over there was talking about how resale clothing isn't very well curated and people don't love thrift stores. And I pointed them in the direction of a really popular US thrift store chain called Buffalo Exchange, which they hire buyers, people to sift through clothing, and they buy clothing from people. And the reason I bring this up is like, what they were talking about, the solution literally existed just in another context, right? It existed in another country. And so when you're thinking about doing something, is there a group or a knowledge base that gets you way closer to the solution, and can you engage with them? So a lot of this work is thinking about how can you learn from other people too.
That's really helpful. I mean, I guess one of the big challenges for like a design sprint or an intensive is that you don't have long for research, but
Yeah.
we will do as much as we can within the constraints of the week.
Sounds good. And if you ever need any, help or suggestions, I can totally point you in the direction of places. But maybe one thing for Charlotte, for you and Connor, is slowly amassing like a knowledge body of, if you teach this again next year or next semester, of like places people can already go to look for research, like different research think tanks and NGOs, and like, here's access to their archive, and this would be a great place to like immediately pull from research papers.
Idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should have a chat.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. That's been amazing.
It really has. Thanks
Yeah.
a lot. There's loads to think about.
We will keep you posted on how the week goes, and yeah, good luck with everything you're working on, and we'll speak to you soon.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.